The historical setting. To set the context, Joseph, son of Jacob, he had just been sold by his brothers. Furthermore, the brothers had lied to Jacob. Jacob had to accept the painful assumption that his son Joseph had died. For the brothers, he had disappeared, probably dead. However, Jose was very much alive. When Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite merchants, he was bought by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was the boss of the guard of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, according to Genesis 39, verse 1. Jose found himself in a foreign environment and an unknown culture, surrounded by a new language. This beloved son of Rachel, and openly preferred by Jacob, his aged father, was sold like any other slave, and thrown into a situation that seemed even more desperate than the abyss in which his brothers had thrown him. Two things are conspicuous by their absence when we are introduced to their condition in Egypt. Firstly, there is no mention of time. We don't know how long Joseph spent in Potiphar's house before these events took place. It could have been 2 years or 2 months. Secondly, there is no talk of adaptations that Joseph had to do. Remember, he came from a home where he was your mother's pride and joy, and a father's favorite son who adored him. He was brutally grabbed by his brothers, stripped of his gaudy cloak, and thrown into a deep, filthy pit without warning. Rescued from this situation, he was sold to hardened slave traders and transported by caravan to a distant land, where it was auctioned off as a low-value commodity. He certainly faced a lot of changes and adjustments. According to Genesis, he was sold to a man named Potiphar, described as the head of the bodyguard, or as interpreted by the NIV, the head of the guard. Potiphar was no fool. Regardless of the title given to him, he was a man with vast military experience and power over life and death. Jose, on the other hand, not only adapted to his new position, but it prospered, for one significant reason. This reason is revealed in a beautiful sentence, which is repeated several times in the story of Joseph. And the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph in such a way that he prospered in the house from his Egyptian master. When his master realized that the Lord was with him and that the Lord granted him success in everything he did, Jose won his favor and became his assistant. Potiphar placed him at the head of his house and entrusted him with all his possessions. From the moment you put it on as responsible for your home and for everything he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was over everything Potiphar had, both at home and in the field. So Potiphar left everything under the care of Jose. With Jose in charge, he didn't care about anything else, except with the food he consumed. Furthermore, Joseph was a robust and handsome young man. Genesis 39, verses 2 through 6. Joseph's life was intricately linked to the sovereign God of Israel. He guided him and gave him favor in the eyes of Potiphar. God, without a doubt, was the key for Jose's success. This has nothing to do with luck. Furthermore, Jose did not need to convince Potiphar that the Lord was with him, for Potiphar could clearly see this when his master noticed that the Lord accompanied him and gave him success in everything he did. Genesis 39, verse 3. Furthermore, Jose did not use his religiosity as a device to gain the favor of his boss. Joseph won the favor of the Lord simply because the Lord made everything he undertook prosper. Note that it does not say that Joseph asked Potiphar for favors. He found favor in the eyes of Potiphar. Potiphar recognized Joseph's trust in Jehovah by observing the proofs of this faith in Jose's life and work. Joseph was a hard-working and diligent young man. Potiphar therefore increased his responsibilities and authority. Finally, the head of the guard entrusted him with the management of his own household. In other words, he transferred all his assets for Joseph's control. Everything Potiphar acquired, placed under the management of Joseph, says the Hebrew. It is interesting to note that not only Potiphar's possessions were under the close supervision and direction of Jose, but also all your earnings. What an extraordinary advance. from a common slave, probably one of dozens in Potiphar's house, managing the home of Egypt's greatest military man. But Hosea's story only gets better, for through Joseph the Lord blessed Potiphar's house and everything he owned. Greater success brings higher levels of trust, which in turn lead to periods most at risk of vulnerability. Regarding the ascension, F.B. Meyer argues wisely, "We may expect temptation in the days of prosperity, more than in the days of deprivation and hard work, not on the scorching sands of the desert, but on the sunny plains of complacency. Not when the young man is hard climbing the steep ladder of fame, but when he already crossed the golden portals, not where men frown, but where they smile, a sweet, exotic smile of flattery. That's where the temptress hides. Be careful." What a wise saying. This warning is not for those who are down or unfortunate. The message is intended for the successful, to the rising executive, to the man or woman on the way at the top of the hierarchy. The one who is reaping the fruits, increased privacy and trust. Scottish essayist Thomas Carlyle was correct when he observed, "Adversity is sometimes hard on a man, but for one who can endure prosperity, there are 100 who will endure adversity." The temptations that accompany prosperity are much bigger and more subtle than those that come with adversity. Joseph was clearly thriving. Potiphar was in charge of everything, and we read that he did not care with nothing but the food he ate. That's what I'm talking about when I mention trust. Here was a slave who deserved to be revered and trusted. As a result, Potiphar gave everything into his hands. I interpret this as suggesting that Hosea planned his own routine, organized Potiphar's estate, and managed all of its finances. Potiphar entrusted him with everything. But remember that with greater success come higher levels of trust, which inevitably leads to most critical periods of vulnerability. In such moments we can hope temptation in days of prosperity. That's where temptation hides, waiting. Beware. The Holy Spirit that hovered over the writing of the biblical text led to the intelligent choice and need the words. Thus, Genesis 39 verse 6 ends with an unexpected but meaningful phrase. Now Joseph was beautiful in appearance and countenance. The Living Bible says, Joseph, by the way, he was a very attractive young man. The New International Version states, Hosea was good-looking and handsome. These words used to describe Joseph's appearance appear only 4 times in the Old Testament, in reference to Joseph, Saul, David, and Absalom. Realize there was nothing wrong in being physically fit or attractive. However, these characteristics come with their own set of temptations. Here was a man who had it all, fame and power, authority and respect. A domestic worker who owned everything. Your own private quarters, access to highly confidential information, and the complete trust of your employer. Plus, he was a good-looking man that, despite not wanting such attention, attracted the eyes of women. It is not surprising that the tempter, the enemy of Joseph's soul, if you focused on these external characteristics, the scriptures do not soften the words, nor Potiphar's wife. And it happened after these events that his master's wife looked at Hosea with desire and said, "Lie with me." Genesis 39 verse 7, that's what I would call direct approach. Let's go back to a previous comment. Greatest achievements lead to moments most vulnerable. The temptress is waiting there, be careful. And it happened after these events. The author of Genesis suggests, alluding to the previous verses which detail Hosea's achievements, that he was prepared for the enemy's attack. It was an attempt with laser precision. Potiphar's wife was bold and shameless in her approach. "Come to bed with me." Most people, both then and now, I would have been surprised and, at the very least, flattered for such a tempting statement. Hosea, on the other hand, not for an instant did he hesitate. He reacted with equal bravery, complete confidence in himself and his God. But he refused, telling his master's wife, "See, my master doesn't know what's going on at home, and he handed me everything he owned." There is no one greater in this house than me. He denied me nothing except you, because you are his wife. How then could I commit such evil and sin against God?" Genesis 39, verses 8 to 9. Verse 8 is simple. He refused. Jose categorically rejected the proposal. Don't forget these two great words, even if you forget the rest. If you think Joseph was some kind of spiritual giant, scrap that idea. If you think that a mystical veil of protection kept him under control, rethink. Look at the evidence. An Egyptian woman offered her body, and a young Jewish servant was tempted for his audacious advances, but he refused. "No," he said. He faced her seductive words, looking at her steadily, determined not to give in. How could he do such a thing? For two main reasons. First, devotion to your master. "My master trusts me," he said to that woman. "He has delegated authority over everything he owns to me. You, your wife, are the only thing that is not under my control. I will never betray that faith." The second motivation was his devotion to God. How could I commit such evil and sin against God? Clarence Edward Macartney adds a realistic touch. This was no ordinary temptation. Jose was a young man full of vitality, not a stone statue or an undead in his 20s. It wasn't just a temptation in a single day, but a series of them. How did this vigorous young man in his early 20s manage to say no? Because he knew his life was an open book before his God. At this point in your life, Joseph's God was more real to him than any other thing or person in the world. He was in a secret chamber, totally safe with the master's wife, who had prepared this moment anticipation of lascivious pleasure for him. He was an attractive young bachelor. They were alone, and giving in would have been the most natural in the world. But for Joseph, this was a serious evil, a horrendous offense against their God. So he walked away. You may be thinking, "Phew, I'm glad that's over." I'm grateful to God for Joseph's example. You fight temptation vigorously like this, and she is banished from his life forever. If only, and it happened, as she insisted to Jose day after day, he didn't listen to her to sleep with her or be with her. Genesis 39, verse 10. Potiphar's wife wouldn't take no for an answer. She was not willing to be ignored. So she pressed Jose day after day. She was a diabolical seductress. She was determined to have relations with Jose. All his moral talk about resistance, it only fueled his determination. She didn't care about the purity of her marriage or with the trust between your husband and that young man. His only concern was to satisfy your physical desires at that moment. If you live in the illusion that if you resist the temptation, it will disappear, clear this misconception now. In fact, when you think like this, becomes an even more attractive target for the tempter. Also remember that the tempter wants the recognized personality, the one that is cited by others, the successful individual, the trustworthy spouse, and the pious soul. So it's no surprise that Potiphar's wife pursued Joseph with such tenacity. He was a trophy. Winning him would mean something, but Joseph remained steadfast, and aren't we glad for that? Any sign of interest in her would seal his fate. Bonhoeffer's words are worth repeating. In our limbs there was a dormant inclination for desire, which is both sudden and fierce. With irresistible power, desire takes over the flesh. Suddenly, a secret fire ignites. The lust thus awakened envelops the mind and the will of man in the deepest darkness. We have lost the capabilities of clear discrimination and decision. Once the embers of lust begin to glow, the vivid scene described in James 1 comes into play. When someone is tempted, he should not say, "God is tempting me." For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor tempt anyone. But every person is tempted when she is drawn away by her own evil desire and seduced. James 1 verses 13 to 14. The attraction of sexual lust acts like a magnet, drawing two sudden and fierce forces towards each other, the internal desire and external bait. Face it, if you live in the real world, cannot escape the bait. In fact, even if you can isolate yourself from the outside world, your mind will not allow you to escape external temptation. However, it is important to remember that there is no sin in temptation itself. Sin resides in giving in accepting temptation. When someone else's lust tempts you to give in to your own lust, so much so that your resistance weakens, you succumb to the allure of temptation. Hosea wonderfully exemplifies the secret. He refused to surrender and persisted in resisting. Potiphar's wife kept casting the bait day after day after day, and each time Hosea refused to accept it. "No, no, no," he exclaimed. "Not only did he not listen to her, but I also didn't want to be around her. She was not a person to be with." Hosea repeatedly rejected his attempts, not giving in to them. Finally, she planned a trap for him. And it came to pass, about that time, that Joseph entered the house to do his chores, and there were none of the men of the house around. And she grabbed him by his clothes, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his clothes in their hands and fled, going out into the street. Genesis 39, verses 11 to 12. One day, Hosea entered the house to do his duties. There were no servants in sight. Why? Potiphar's wife may have sent them on errands to get them out of the way. Whatever the reason, she was alone in the house with Hosea and made another attack. This time she wasn't willing to take no for an answer. She went beyond verbal advances and physically grabbed Hosea. She held on so tightly to him, he broke free and ran outside into the street. He left his tunic in her clutches. What a clear image! What a practical way to illuminate the truth from the life of Joseph. What valuable biblical advice. When the New Testament deals with sensual temptation, gives us a command, run. We are not instructed in the Bible to reason with it. We are not told to consider it and claim verses. We are told to flee. You can't give in to sensuality if you're running from her. So run for your life. Aphastisidali, you will eventually give in if you try to reason with lust or play with sensual costumes. You won't be able to fight it, so we run. And that's exactly what Joseph did. He ran into the street, leaving Potiphar's wife there, rejected once again, holding her clothes, and consumed by fury. Heaven has no anger like love turned to hate, nor hell a fury like that of a woman scorned, William Congreve famously said. Lady Potiphar's passion turned into anger. She had wanted Hosea, but now I hated him, which resulted in a fabricated accusation. Upon realizing that he had left his tunic in his hand and fled, she summoned the men of her house and told them his version of the facts. "Look," she said, "this Hebrew who was brought to us came to mock me. He tried to lie with me, but I screamed." Genesis 39, verses 13 to 14. This scorned woman only wanted revenge. To do this, she built a false case against Hosea based on circumstantial evidence, her clothing, and she kept the tunic until Joseph's master came home. And she spoke to him according to these words, saying, "The Hebrew servant you brought to us came to insult me." And it came to pass, when his lord heard his wife's words, his anger flared. And Hosea's master caught him and threw him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were held. And there Joseph was in prison. Genesis 39, verses 16 to 20. She lied to the members of the house, showing the clothes as proof, saying he had tried to attack her. Her screams and tears were those of a rejected woman, indignant at Hosea, the handsome young man, having resisted his advances because he doesn't want anything to do with her. When we read this biblical narrative, our hearts cannot help but feel sorry for Joseph. If there was a time to reward this man, that moment would be now. Reward him for saying no, day after day after day. Reward him for running away instead of giving in. Watch carefully how the plot against Hosea unfolds. On the surface, it's bleak. The personal implications are devastating. Joseph was completely innocent, but the odds were all against him. Potiphar's wife had his robe as evidence, and also your position in the family as a source of manipulative influence. She used both against him, resulting in his arrest. Jose remained in prison. Consider what was going through Joseph's mind in this painful moment, right after being arrested. Not only was he innocent, but he had repeatedly rejected a clear temptation. He has never read Genesis 41 before. He had no idea what would happen in the end. I didn't know that in a matter of years would be the Prime Minister of Egypt. Everything Jose knew in that painful moment was that he had done what was right and had suffered unjustly for it. Time dragged on. Days turned into months. He was again unfairly rejected, forgotten, totally helpless. But somehow, in the midst of this unfair situation, Joseph felt Jehovah's hand in everything. "Joseph, you are mine. Just wait, I'm with you. I'm not ignoring you or rejecting you. You will be a better man, Jose, because of this accusation against you. I haven't finished preparing you for my service yet. Does this sound very pious? Are these ramblings too hard to swallow? Am I off base here? No, if we believe the rest of the story recorded in this chapter. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the eyes of the jailer, and the jailer delivered it into the hands of Joseph, all the prisoners who were in prison. And everything that was done there, Jose was responsible. The jailer didn't care about anything that was under the responsibility of Joseph, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord prospered. Genesis 39, verses 21 to 23. Did you notice the important phrase, "The Lord was with him"? Joseph was in the hands of the Lord. However, the relationship was mutual. Joseph also obeyed God. Instead of becoming bitter and angry, he put God first. As a result, it prospered, even though he's in prison. Incredible. Some practical words of hope. It is possible that you are facing temptation right now. Perhaps he has already given in. Some may be thinking, so far I have managed to resist the pull of sensual temptation, but I need your support to continue resisting. But no one here can say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. So let me conclude with some practical advice. By the grace of God, 4 conditions must be met if you intend to avoid temptation. I'll get straight to the point and explain each of them. Number 1, you must not be weakened by your situation. Number 2, you must not be deceived by persuasion. Number 3, you must not indulge your emotions. Number 4, you must not be confused with immediate results. As for your dilemma, Jose understood everything. He was financially stable, respected and trusted in their profession, could have let all this weaken your resolve, allowing yourself to give in to the opportunity presented, but he didn't. I repeat, if you are going to fight temptation, it cannot be weakened by circumstances. This is consistent with the second condition which you must adhere to. You must not be deceived by persuasion. Your tempter will use precisely the perfect words to convince him. My husband doesn't satisfy me like you do. By giving in, you will show that you really care about me. No one will ever find out. We are completely alone and safe. We must be aware of the fact that moral and ethical self-control is the most valuable feature that you can offer your spouse and family. Stand firm, my friend. Refuse to give in. You too can do what Joseph did. You should too. Every day we are surrounded by deceptive baits, and not all of them come from individuals. Some are influenced by a cable television channel, the internet, a magazine, peer pressure at school or work. Potiphar's wife's seductive words will echo in your head. You'll feel like a prude, the only one who isn't giving in. Don't be fooled by persuasion. No matter how attractive and convincing it is, integrity and fidelity to God should guide your actions. Jose knew this, and you can know it too. However attractive the words may sound, it's all a hoax. Remember, this is all a lie. Third, allow me to emphasize this principle. You should not indulge your emotions. That's right, you read that correctly. Your inner feelings will beg to be satisfied. Temptation will work on them, asking for indulgence. Remember how tenacious Joseph was with his people. Finally, you shouldn't be dazzled by the immediate results. Remember Joseph once again. He was wrongly accused and imprisoned after doing what was right and fighting evil. You will find that it has been forgotten for a long period after that. Don't be fooled by quick results. You might lose your job, you may lose your lover, if we can call this person that. You may lose group acceptance, can be a source of ridicule. You can be kicked out of the social circle. You might be the only one not doing something, so you must be the one to resist. If you profess the name of Jesus Christ, profess it completely and totally, and remain morally pure from today onwards. Even if it means being demoted, losing status, or lose your job, escape this situation. You owe it to yourself and your family, and most importantly, he owes it to God. The reality revealed in the life of Jose applies to all of us, whether married, single, divorced, or remarried, man or woman, young or old. Do not stay under any circumstances, however tempting, delicious, or briefly pleasant as the bait may seem. Claim miraculous strength that comes from knowing Jesus Christ and stand strong in your power while operating under its authority. Decide to be a Jose right now, right now. Determined to join his ranks and then refuse from now on. If you don't, you will give in. It's only a matter of time before it happens. God always protects his own.